So my name is Ross Yelsey. Welcome to this event today. I'm the Assistant Director of Admission and Marketing here at Columbia Journalism School, also an alum of the school, and I'm really happy this is going to be a showcase of a couple of our alums to talk more about what career paths might be like after coming to Columbia Journalism School. I know all of you who are attending the session are likely thinking of applying or have already applied to Columbia for this cycle and are definitely have probably learned a lot about our programs, about the classes, the faculty, all the opportunities that you'll have at the school. But now we're going to look a little beyond into the future, and I'm really happy we're going to have the chance to talk to some really great people who've come through the school and have really amazing careers following their education here. And I'd like to remind people too that if you're thinking about applying, our deadlines are coming up for all of our programs. If you're thinking of applying to any of our MS programs and to our PhD in communications, our deadline is coming up on December 15th. So just a little over a week away. So definitely reach out to us if you have questions about that. I'm going to put a link in the chat here for our drop-in session. So if you do want to ask us questions on the admission side about anything about the application, please reach out and join our drop-in sessions. We're going to have one a week this week and then twice a week next week. So there's plenty of time to schedule a chat with us about that. And if you think about the MA program, which one of our alums who's in this event will be discussing, that deadline is coming up on January 5th. So a little longer for the MA application deadline. So more time to work on that and to reach out to us as well. But without further ado, I'd like to talk now about career paths after Columbia, and I'd like to welcome Anusha Shrivastava, our Associate Dean of Career Development, who is also an alum of the school. And since we're talking about careers, I'll hand it over to you to talk a bit about your own career path, Anusha, and then we'll have our conversation with our two alums following that.
Thank you, Ross. I'm thrilled to be here and very excited that we are going to talk to two of our fellow alums here, Neha Masih, who is in Seoul, Korea, and Joe Quadrera, who is right here in New York City. As Ross mentioned, I am an alumna of Columbia Journalism School. I graduated in 2002. I had been a business journalist before I came to the journalism school. I had spent about 6 years in New Delhi working for a BBC World program called India Business Report. So that was broadcast. Then when I came to the J School, I decided that I would focus more on print. When I graduated, I worked for the Globe and Mail in Toronto in Canada. That was digital. And then I worked at the Associated Press, at a few papers in Connecticut, and then spent 6 years at the Wall Street Journal and Dow Jones covering credit markets and foreign exchange markets. After that, in 2013, I switched to the, out of the newsroom to come to higher ed. And the best place for me to come to, of course, was Columbia Journalism School. So I joined the career services team here in 2013. After 2 years, I moved to the Department of Statistics at Columbia. And recently, about 2 years ago, I came back to the journalism school as Director of Alumni Relations. And then last year, became Associate Dean for Career Development here at the journalism school. The reason I detail all of this is to give you a glimpse of how, when you join the journalism school, whether you decide to stay in a newsroom or you pivot out, you take your skills that you've learned at the journalism school to whichever career you join. So in my case, when I moved out of a newsroom after 20 plus years, it was in higher ed. And this is where I am now. To talk a little bit about what my office does. We focus on getting students ready for their careers. This means that we train them fully to look for jobs. In doing that, we work very closely in fixing your resume, your LinkedIn profile, your cover letters, and we guide you in looking for a job. On the employer side, we make sure that the employers come talk to you in person and virtually. We train you to interview both digitally, online, as well as in person. We have a lot of events throughout the year. So for instance, this semester, for the students who started in August, we've had about 57 events to date. That's almost 60 events. We categorize them under Meet the Media, View from the Trenches, and Career Development Workshops. So as an example, just this week, Neha was part of our View from the Trenches. This is when we invite alums to come talk about their careers with the students. We talk about what they learned at the journalism school, which they took to the careers that they went on to. We've had conversations with Joe in the past, for instance, because he pivoted and, out of one career into another. Our other events, which are Meet the Media events, are employers who come and talk to students about their newsrooms and about the internships and jobs they have on offer. The third category is the workshops that we hold, and these are all about writing better resumes, improving your digital presence, mock interview sessions, telling employers about your careers and what you want to do next, and so on. So we fully train students to participate in the job market, and we fully train employers to meet the students, not just through these events, but also through our Career Expo. This is an annual event held in March. We have more than 150 news organizations participating in the Career Expo, and each student gets the opportunity to meet with the employer of their choice. So this is something we work towards throughout the year. Later this week, we are opening registration for employers. I have to mention to you that a lot of our employers are alums, and they like to come back to the journalism school because they know that we've trained the students to work well in a newsroom. So our connections with alums, and many of you probably know this, we have more than 15,000 alums globally. So any newsroom that you look at, you will find an alum. This is hugely comforting, as well as it's a way for you to know that when you are looking for a job, there will be an alum who will be able to guide you. So this, in short, is a little bit about my career, what my office does, and what you would look forward to when you join the journalism school. Ross, did I miss anything?
No, I think that was very thorough. So thank you, Anusha.
Absolutely. Would you like me now to bring in Neha and Joseph to talk about their careers?
That sounds great. Yes.
Wonderful. So let's start with Neha, who is in Seoul. She is an MA Politics graduate from the journalism school. She graduated in 2016. She is with the Washington Post and has had a very illustrious career, won several awards. And then Joseph Quadrera, who was a banker. He was with Morgan Stanley for many years. I hope, Joseph, you were not trying to hide that fact because you really pivoted. You moved out of banking and came to the journalism school. You then founded a company where you talked to many of our alums as well. So, Neha, could you tell us a little bit about your career?
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me, and hello to everyone here. Good luck with the applications as the process goes. I know the last few weeks are always feel the worst, but it'll be over soon. So that's the good thing. So as Anusha mentioned, I'm a reporter at the Washington Post. I'm currently based in Seoul, and I report on breaking international stories. That's the team that I'm on now. I've been here for about a year, and before this, I was the India correspondent based in Delhi. So in that role, I was covering all news out of South Asia. I came to Columbia Journalism School a few years after I'd already worked in India as a television reporter. So I was really looking to not so much to learn the brass tacks of how to be a reporter or how to report, but actually aim to build upon the experience that I already had, which is why I did the MA Politics program, specializing in politics and global affairs. So for me, it was really important to train in the American School of Journalism, because I hadn't had any international experience at that point of time. I was also looking to pivot from television to print, which is where I saw myself, in the long run. I was looking to learn how to write for an international audience, I was looking to understand how one can report out a story over several months and then write 10,000 words, how to look at complex geopolitical issues with nuance. So all of those reasons, sort of like the MA program was the obvious choice in this instant. And I think it's safe to say that it was the right choice and it's held me in good stead. And I think things that I learned in that classroom, I still apply in my job every day when I come to work. So yeah, it was a very useful experience for me, and it definitely helped in providing me with the ability and equipping me to be ready for the kind of job that I wanted to do, which is what I'm doing right now.
Great. Thank you, Neha. Joe, your path was very different, as I heard.
Yeah.
You're a banker. So tell us how you decided to come to the journalism school and how your career panned out after that.
So yeah, very different experience than Neha, and I think that's good. You can hear sort of like the uh, vast way that you can use your Columbia degree. So I always tell people for pretty much most of my professional life, my life was bifurcated between my profession and my passion. So my profession was always finance. So I have a BA in finance from Notre Dame, an MBA in finance and strategy from NYU, and I was a banker at Morgan Stanley for 17 years. So don't worry, you didn't out me, Anusha, by telling everyone I was a banker. But my passion was always writing. When I was a little kid, I wrote poetry, short stories, and novellas. After college, I wrote 3 novels. After my third, and this is all while I was a banker, obviously, when I was writing these novels. After my third novel, I realized that I didn't want to invent stories in my head and just write them. I wanted to hear real people tell real stories and share them with others. So I started a blog where I walked around the streets of New York City and I walked up to random people, everywhere from men in three-piece suits to homeless people. I interviewed them and I shared their stories with others. And this experience taught me that everyone has a story to tell, but that not everyone is a storyteller, and that there's a huge interest in the untold stories of others. That blog got 1.5 million views. And while I was doing this, I was like, you know what I'm doing right now, interviewing people and sharing their stories with others, that's what journalism is. So I went to the career fair at Columbia, and it was really funny because, obviously Columbia University is a vaunted institution, and I met a lot of other candidates, and they said, oh, they'd interviewed heads of state and presidents, and I was like, I mostly interview like homeless people on the weekend, and like I don't know that I necessarily fit in here. I threw my hat in the ring, and much to my surprise, I was accepted. I applied to the MS program because, unlike Neha, I had no experience writing. That was really the right program for me. And also, I remember Elena Cabral, who was one of the admissions officer at that time. She said, "Well, when you apply to Columbia, even though you're geared to write long form stuff, who knows where you're going to end up? You might end up in broadcast journalism or writing for newspapers." I very quickly found out 2 things. Number one, that I wanted to continue to do long form. And number two, that I was not cut out to be a journalist. More to come on that later. Which wasn't a bad thing. It was just my realization that writing like cutting edge stuff was not my path. And I'll talk about where I went from there.
That's fabulous, Joe, because that was going to be my next question. What are you doing now? And is your current career the one you had thought you wanted when you were at the J School? And then we'll go to Neha right after. So go ahead, Joe.
So what am I doing now? In November of 2021, I founded a biography writing services company. I like to say we're democratizing the biography writing process. Historically, you had to be rich or famous to have your story captured by a professional and shared with your progeny. And we're making it affordable for regular people to work with professionals. So right now, I have, as of last night, 75 journalists and professional writers that work for me, about 60 in the US, 7 in Europe, and 5 in Australia. And if you can think of a national newspaper or magazine, New York Times, the New Yorker, Washington Post, CNN, USA Today, Forbes, Rolling Stone, on and on and on. One of my writers has written for them. So Yeah, so we write people's biographies, and it is absolutely not what I thought I would be doing. I had no idea that this was even a business or this was something that was even possible. But I will say, had I not gone to Columbia, I would not have, in my opinion, had the credibility to do this, right? And to not only attract journalists and writers to work at my company, but to convince people that they should trust me and my company to capture their life stories. So yeah, when I entered journalism, no clue this existed, complete pivot from banking, but I'm enjoying it so far.
That's great. Thank you, Joe. How about you, Neha? Were you thinking that you would be a foreign correspondent, that you'd be based so far from where you had started out when you were at the J School?
Yeah, so the short answer is it is. I did, that is exactly what I was looking to do when I came to Columbia. I wanted to have the breadth of experience that would lead me, to a job. That is what I'm doing now. In India, I had some experience of reporting on international issues for the television network that I was working at, but it was a local media outlet. And I thought that the next step for me would be to work for an international publication where I could cover, global issues. Also, because there is not as much scope for covering international news in Indian media outlets. For various reasons. So that was the idea. I After graduating, I stayed on in the US on the OPT to cover the presidential election that year, which was when Trump was running. So it was like a really fascinating time. And I think I think that was like a really good training ground, because I just feel like I had, just been like talking and learning in the class about like democracy and all of these like issues, and I could immediately apply them to coming up with stories that I was not familiar reporting on, including covering the election. So yeah, and in that campaign, I actually ended up meeting Trump. So which is another story. But I'm just saying that experience was really sort of like helpful, and being able to like grab that opportunity pretty much only happened because I felt confident enough after the program that I had done. And yeah, so initially I did return to India, and I was working for a newspaper back in India until I could not work there anymore. And that's when I moved to writing for international publications, and the Washington Post job has been, exactly the kind of work that I wanted to do. In India, I was focusing a lot on like investigations and writing about like the region, both in terms of the news that was happening, but also like writing about like people and their lives and hopes and dreams. So it's like you're responsible for a 360-degree view of a place for an audience that is not familiar with it. So it was really exciting because I am from there, so I had a different kind of stake in that region, obviously. And after doing that for 4 years, I felt that I needed to broaden my horizon, and I didn't only want to remain, an India expert. So that was the next step, and here I am now writing about pretty much every big breaking news that happens around the world or in the US. We are in charge of covering all the news on Asia time. So we sort of like start the day for the newsroom. And it's challenging, it's very exciting, and yeah, one never knows what one is going to be doing that particular day. And yeah, it's just the best.
Great. Could you talk a little bit about what you learned at the J School that has helped you in your career? We can start with Joe and go to Neha if you like.
Sure. So I would say that the number one thing is it taught me how to write better. Um, it taught me how to more efficiently conduct interviews. I in a lifetime of learning, it's spending a lot of time in the classroom. My favorite ever class was Jonathan Wiener's narrative writing class. It was pretty amazing to, again, be a guy that had never published anything from a journalism perspective, and all of a sudden be in a classroom with 15 people, being led by a Pulitzer Prize winning author, teaching me how to be a better writer. So yeah, it made me definitely a better writer. And I entered Columbia having never published anything, and I graduated having published 2 articles during my time, including my master's thesis. So went from like an unpublished blogger to a published journalist. Both pieces I published were around 5,000 words, so kind of the stuff that I like to do. Um, Also for me in my particular career path, having had no experience with journalism, it helped me understand the way that journalism worked, the way that newsrooms work, the good and the bad, the different types of journalism there are, um, how journalists are compensated and where there are issues with journalist compensation, which is something I try to address with my company. So yeah, I would say those are my main takeaways from Columbia.
Great, thank you. Neha.
Yeah, I had a slightly different experience from Joe. So I think for me, the most useful aspect was that my professors enabled me to interrogate complexity. And I think that is a very useful lesson for journalists, because news or any topic that we write about is never going to be black and white. It's easy to sort of like sweep those away and write without nuance. But that's not going to be standout work then. And at least, again, for me personally, many of the issues that I focus on are extremely complicated, and there are no sort of like easy answers. So to have that ability to be able to think sensitively and thoughtfully about all of these and tease those things out in your writing, I think have really helped me distinguish my work. And I'm proud to say that just this year, 3 of my stories from last year won like really big awards. So I think that focus on not shying away from delving into difficult sort of like aspects of these topics was really helpful. And obviously, what I really appreciated was that there was like a theoretical aspect to the coursework, but there was also the practical aspects of like writing assignments. So it did not feel like, oh, here I am sitting reading like 35 pages of hard theory, which can be dense and not very pleasant each evening. But then you can immediately see the difference reading those will make to the kind of writing that you're doing, or how you're approaching subjects, or how you're thinking about framing your stories, all of those issues. And I think the other thing that was really stand out for me was that there were a lot of people who would come to talk to to at least my MA class were actually journalists from the field. So they would come and either talk about like a particular story they had written, or an issue they were covering. And that was really helpful, because they would talk about the process as well. So what are the challenges that you might face if you were, doing working with a whistleblower with sensitive material, or doing an investigation which takes like 6 months. So very sort of like practical, handy things that you are likely to encounter, or some that you might not have envisaged, or some that I had personally sort of like faced previously. All of those were sort of like evident from the experience of other journalists, and that I think I found really useful too.
Wonderful. So shifting gears slightly, I'd like to ask you both how you stay in touch with the journalism school, because, you graduated a couple of years ago. You're here in this session, so clearly you are connected with us. But have you, since the time you graduated, stayed in touch maybe with professors or your classmates? Could you talk a little bit about that? You want to go first, Joe?
Yeah, sure. So Um, the Columbia, again, I mentioned I went to two other universities, Notre Dame and NYU. By far, my Columbia network has been most important to me. Um, this is something that might not resonate with people, or it might, but I think it's something that is very important to me, and that is when I launched my business. Launching a business is a very difficult thing, and Columbia University has something called the Columbia Startup Lab. And the Startup Lab is Columbia takes their 71 most promising entrepreneurs. They bring them into, they give them a subsidized office space in Soho in New York City, give them access to mentors, introductions to venture capitalists. And, I'm surrounded by 71 other alumni from Columbia. Um, it is something that the university has a big focus on. I actually met the president of Columbia at an event there last week. My business has been introduced to the Columbia Angel Network, which is a group of alumni that help uh, make investments in Columbia started entrepreneurs. My business was featured in the Columbia Gift Guides, which goes out to Columbia alumni. And I also participate in the Columbia Career Fair, which Anusha mentioned before, every year. When I was at Columbia, I went to the career fair, and actually through a connection there, I published my second article. I presented, I think, Anusha, this is like, I think I've done it the last 2 years,
Yeah.
and have pitched to people who are soon to be alumni of Columbia at the career fair. And that's how I probably have like 45 or 50 journalists that have graduated from Columbia that have stayed, that freelance with my company. So, Columbia Startup Lab keeps me involved. I go to a lot of alumni events and talks. And once you become friends with Anusha, also not engaging with the alumni is not an option anymore. Now, she does a really good job of keeping everyone together and inviting us to relevant events and whatnot.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
I do remember that when you were launching, you had reached out to me and we had talked about your business, and we had talked about how advertising to Columbia G School alums was important because you have this great pool of writers right here at Pulitzer Hall, right?
Yeah. And it's good, it's supplemental income, and the writers get $70 an hour, which I think is attractive. And I mentioned before, I learned about how journalists don't, and many times are not compensated equitably, and I want to write that to the little degree that I can. So, yeah, so because of that, that supplemental income, we work with quite a few journalists from Columbia.
Absolutely. Thank you, Joe. We do appreciate that. And this is something I was mentioning to you all earlier, which is some of our alums are also employers. And in this case, you see how Joe, who graduated from the journalism school, now knows that he can come back to the journalism school each year and get students who will then be writers for his company. So that's important. Neha, how about you? How do you stay in touch with the journalism school?
Well, Joe stole part of my answer. I was going to say through you. Well, before Anusha was the career development uh, chief, she was in charge of the alum network. So that's a big reason. I would say, yeah, there's no escaping networks once you are in touch with Anusha, which is very helpful. So thank you for all of that. Within my class that I had, we had our own WhatsApp group. Both my professors in the MA Politics program are super nice, and I have been in touch with them through these years. Each time I was, getting a job or losing a job or writing something, I would share it with them, and they would always respond. And every time I have passed by or passed through New York, I've made it a point to go see them. That's definitely helped. And there are, of course, Facebook groups and LinkedIn groups that one is part of that helps to know what is happening. For the MA politics, no, sorry, not the MA politics. There's an MA program Twitter account that very often tweets stories that MA grads do. So that's also where I follow that account. I really like it because it just kind of helps you know what other people are writing from, like, 5 years ago or 5 years later. And I really enjoy reading those. And then, of course, there's an alumni newsletter, which I find really helpful. That basically lists, people, what jobs people have gotten over the past month, or what awards they have won, or what books they've written. And that's for, like, again, like a very wide range of years. So it's not limited to, your batch or the year you graduated. So it's like a very cool roundup of like everything people have been up to. So yeah, I do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love reading the alumni newsletter because you are hearing about your peers, you're hearing about your classmates, you're also hearing about what people who graduated many, many years ago are doing now. Many of them have pivoted out of journalism, but we want to know where you might be able to go, right? You get ideas on how careers are shaped. So if there's someone who graduated in the 50s or the 60s and is doing something completely different than what you had thought of earlier, now you know that there's an option. There are people who've moved on to running nonprofits. There are others who've moved on, like Joseph, to set up their own companies. These are also good leads for jobs because in my current role, for instance, the most important thing for me to know is where are our alums, what are they doing, and how could they help employ students who are graduating, right? So it's really important to stay connected. And what Neha and Joseph mentioned, I know we laughed about it, but the fact is that when you have more than 15,000 alums around the globe, you can get ideas, you can find jobs, you can also get mentorship, right? So not just the professors who've taught you, but also all the alums that you can reach out to. Which leads me to my next question to you, Neha and Joseph. Have you touched base with alums anywhere? And if you did, what is it that you were trying to find out from them? How are you connected to the alumni groups? Neha, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, as I said, that a lot of it is through social media, which obviously makes it easy to sort of like keep track of without having to put in too much effort, because obviously everyone has like super busy lives and careers. I think one of the best things of having such a wide network, I would say, is that it really helps me in my job as a journalist too. So if I want to reach someone in like Kenya, I can call my classmate who's, a reporter with the New York Times based there. Or if I have a question about like Italian politics that I have to tackle in my story today, I can call another friend from the J school. So that for me has been really sort of helpful in my day-to-day job, especially now when I'm sort of like, write about anything and everything. And I think it also definitely makes it easier to network. So if I have, if I have to like meet someone that I don't know and they are an alum, I guess it's like, easier to sort of like find a point of contact or connect with them. It could be, again, sources, or it could be, for an application or whatever you might need in that moment. So I think as a journalist, having connections is such a big part of our job that any big network like this is always going to be helpful in some way at some point. So yeah, I think it's definitely very, very useful.
Yeah, Joseph?
Yeah, sure. So I try to really go to as many like alumni events and talks as possible. I'm old school in that Zoom sessions are great and obviously make sense in a lot of scenarios. But one thing I love personally about living in New York City is I can go to in-person events hosted by the J School, network with other alumni. Um, Something that's probably unique to me, but as I mentioned, I probably have 45 or 50 J School graduates that work at StorySaver, and they're constantly introducing me to other J School alumni. It's kind of a funny story. When I first started StorySaver, I was in my last class at the J School, I was Kevin Coyne, a narrative writing class, and I said, "Hey, at the end of class, can I pitch and ask if anybody wants to join my company?" And there was probably 15 people in the class, 12 raised their hand, and ultimately, none of them came. They all raised their hand, and then 3 months later, when it was time to roll, nobody actually came with me. Some of them have actually since joined, but so it was kind of rough start for me with my company, but now a lot of the journalists from the J School that write for StorySaver see the opportunities there. They like the work, they find it's interesting, they introduce me to other alumni. So fortunately, yeah, it was hard for me to get journalists to join, and now probably every other week I'll be introduced to a J School alumni. Then yeah, just social media. I stay in touch with a lot of people from the J School on social media. Anusha, I know you're a LinkedIn power user. I'm trying to do the same. It's very easy to, as Neha said, to like, if you need to speak with somebody that went to the J School and they're in an area that you need to get to, reaching out to them called on LinkedIn, mentioning that you both went to the J School. I'd say like 95% of the time you'll get a response. It's a pretty tight-knit community, and yeah, so LinkedIn is great for that.
Yes, thank you. Two things that struck me. One, in terms of Kevin Coyne was one of my professors as well, by the way, and he's fabulous. On LinkedIn, as well as the fact that you have a columbia.edu email, we alums get to keep that email. The reason I mention it is, if in your inbox you get an email from someone who went to Columbia, you're not going to ignore it. So our network is so strong that if someone has not responded on LinkedIn, you reach out using your columbia.edu email, you will get a response. I wanted to share one quick story before we open it up, for Q&A, is that when I was graduating from the J School, I moved to Canada. I was planning to move to Canada for personal reasons, and I didn't know anyone there. So I reached out to an alumna via email. Now think about this. This is 2002. We didn't have Zoom at that time, which, goodness, can you imagine life without Zoom? But it did exist. And she and I had never met. She passed on my resume to the business editor at the Globe and Mail. I went over, I interviewed, I got the job, I worked. I moved back to the US, and like I told you, I worked at multiple papers in Connecticut and then at the Wall Street Journal. Finally, when I found my way back to the J School, not in the first stint, but the second round, when I was director of alumni relations and helping organize Alumni Weekend, which, by the way, is a fabulous time to network with alums from all over the world, because they come for this one event. It's held every April, and many, many alums come from across the globe to attend it. I was looking at the attendees' names, and I saw a name that looked very familiar. And I realized this was the alumna who 20 years ago had passed on my resume to the business editor at the Globe and Mail. And so I got to meet her in person when I was director of alumni relations. And the reason I mention this is someone I had never met. I had literally just sent her an email saying, I'm moving to Canada, I'm looking for a job. Do you have any leads? Now, that connection, after 20 years, I got to thank her in person. I actually got to say, hey, I got my job at the Globe and Mail because of the connection that you made. This is the power of our network. This is the depths of how strongly connected we are, and we always help each other. So before we open it up to Q&A, last question for you, Neha and Joe. What advice would you give to potential new students on how to make the most of opportunities available at Columbia? We've touched on a few of them, which includes my office and the training that we give for career development and the alumni networks. But what is it that you think you took from the J School and what they could learn when they join? So let's start with you, Neha.
Sure. I would say be open and be curious. Those are both things that I would assume most people who want to do journalism are already. But that should, be applicable to like all spheres of your life. There are going to be tons of opportunities at Columbia, both at the J School and outside of it. And you should, grab all of them with both hands. You can pick classes outside of the J School. That was very exciting for me. You can, study religion or a region that you're interested in, or urbanism, which can, help you in the beat that you might want to do later. Your classmates are going to be from around the world. And I think that's one of the best learnings for me, just to be able to like interact with people from so many places. Was so exciting for me because I knew I was looking to do like, international news, and that's just been wonderful. The world's topmost experts or like super bright people are constantly coming to give like talks at Columbia, or there are events about them. You should not only go listen to them, but interface with them, ask them questions, engage with them. It's just like an opportunity that you will otherwise not have within reach. You might have to like, pay to go hear these people otherwise, or not have a chance to actually interact with them. So I would say like, do everything that's on offer. Enjoy being in New York. It's one of the greatest experiences of your lives, I would imagine. And yeah, basically grow and thrive.
Thank you, Neha. Joe?
Yeah, sure. So I will steal a little bit of Niha's answer. Be open and curious. Approach with an open mind, as Neha said, in life in the J School. Again, I went to the J School thinking that I would transition into journalism, and had I had a closed mindset, I might have said, well, journalism doesn't feel like it's exactly for me. Maybe this isn't the right thing, but I approached with an open mind, saw what came to be, and literally could not be happy with what I'm doing now. So leverage the education, but be open to whatever comes your way. The other thing I'd say, and what I probably feel most emphatic about, is to be entrepreneurial. This is just my assessment. A lot of writers don't seem to be enterprising, don't think of creative ways to leverage their abilities. I probably look at things from a different perspective, having been a banker for 17 years. I don't know if it's the right perspective or the wrong perspective, but yeah, be enterprising, be entrepreneurial. A little interesting empirical anecdote is that the Columbia Startup Lab, the reason the president of Columbia was there was because we were celebrating the 10th anniversary of the Columbia Startup Lab. As far as I am able to determine, I'm the only person from the J School to ever go to the Columbia Startup Lab, which I think should change. I would, again, encourage people to be creative about how they can use the skills that they garner at Columbia J School to start businesses, to do new and creative things, if they don't want to go into journalism. And then, I'd say the other thing is just, we've kind of said it before, but utilize the Columbia network, attend events, reach out to people. The education that you get at Columbia is obviously impactful and important, but I think the real reason why you get a Columbia degree is for the alumni network, which is a lifetime subscription. So yeah, those would be my general thoughts.
Great, thank you. Really appreciate Neha and Joseph, both of you, for making the time. I'm going to hand it over now to Ross to moderate the Q&A. So thank you again, Neha and Joe both.
Great, and thanks everyone. We got some questions in the chat already, some really good ones, so I'll pass those on to our panelists in a moment. I saw some questions that were more about admissions or about what we're looking for admissions purposes. For those questions, definitely join our drop-in admissions sessions where we can talk more about the nuts and bolts of the application, since this is more of a career panel today. But in terms of careers, we got a good question. Maybe Anusha, you'd want to potentially answer this one. How can the school help people who maybe are not native English speakers potentially look for careers in the English speaking world, such as US or other countries that are where English is the language of writing and reporting?
Sure. So just as an example, this year alone, we have students from 36 different countries. So think about that. Clearly, not all of them have English as their native language, but we have employers who are looking for people with language skills. One of the most important things that employers are looking for is diversity. And it's also diversity of languages, because in even in a city like New York and other multiple smaller cities, there are communities for whom English may not be the first language. So to cover those communities, it is essential to have a reporter who's bilingual or trilingual. So definitely use that as an advantage, all the language skills that you have. In terms of reporting in English, the help you will get will be not only line editing at the journalism school, but there's also a writing center that helps students. So there are multiple opportunities for you to go out and get help in reporting and writing in English.
Great, thank you. And then another question, this is more about, I guess, pre-getting to Columbia. Say, of course, our admissions decisions will come out in March to everyone, whether you're applying to the MS or the MA or to the doctoral programs, any of our programs. But if in the happy incident that someone is accepted to our program, chooses to come, is there any advice of what they should do maybe in the time running up to coming to the school to think about careers before they actually hit the ground at Columbia?
Sure. And I will let Neha and Joe answer this as well, because they probably did a couple of things before they came to the J School. My advice to anyone who is applying and wants to come, especially if you're an international student, is to get as many clips as possible before you come to the J School. The reason I say this is because you will not be able to work while you're on an F1 visa, which means that if you want to use your clips when you look for jobs, then either you're going to use your class clips or any work that you've done before you come to the journalism school. So that would be the first thing to do. The second is to make sure that you're well connected with anyone that you have worked with, because you will be looking for recommendations. So before you come, in terms of looking for a job, connect with your supervisors, your previous colleagues, anyone who will be able to provide you with recommendations. Because once you're at the J School, you're going to get recommendations from professors here, which is fabulous. But if you have an employer from the past who can recommend your work, that's good too. I do want to ask Joe and Neha, what did you do before you came to the journalism school that you think might have helped in your career?
I guess for me, I mean, and again, I approach this a very different way. Is what what really helped me was just approaching people on the streets and learning to have conversations with people, learning how to interview people, learning how to be comfortable interviewing strangers, and that that simple process of interviewing people, getting them comfortable with me, pulling stories out of them, sharing them with my audience. Again, coming from somebody who had a banking background, who had never been published, who is not a journalist, being able to showcase all of that work. And that blog was, I think, about in totality about 100,000 words when you aggregated all of the stories. So for me, for somebody that came from a very atypical background, showing Columbia that I had the curiosity to tell stories, the ability to connect with people, the ability to write a cohesive piece of writing. That's all that I used to get into Columbia, because again, I came from a different background. And so that was tremendously helpful for me.
Thank you. Neha.
I would say that a good way to prep for both the MA and MS programs is to familiarize yourself with the kind of classes that you want to take. And that's especially important for the MS program, because there are so many classes that are available to you to make that kind of combination. I don't even know how that works, but I remember like seeing the list and being just like, oh my God, they're like so spoiled for choice. There is also that element in the MA program, but that's mostly for the external classes that you can take, so which are outside of the J school. And I think I could have done that, like before time, and that would have maybe like helped me plan things better. So I think that's definitely helpful. And for the MA program, people, I would say it is good to come with at least an idea or two about what you want to do for your main thesis assignment, which is basically what you will sort of report out through a lot of your time at the J school, and then like produce a 10,000 word piece. And if you want to like do it really well, you should come with an idea instead of thinking, oh, once I'm there, I'm going to like come up with what I want to do. If you have that idea beforehand, it'll help you, find the right professor who will sort of be your mentor through the process. It'll just like make a lot of your life simpler, I would say, because it can basically be a story that you can report out from anywhere in the world. And if you want to like travel for that, it'll just like really ease things if you know where you want to go and what you want to like look into.
Thank you. I want to add one quick thing before I give it back to you, Ross, which is use LinkedIn to look up the careers of as many Columbia J School alums as you can. Get some sense of where you want to go and what you want to do, and look up to see the profiles of those who've done it before you and how they were at Columbia and what they did after they graduated and how they're doing what they're doing now. I think that's really useful for you, because then you'll see that whatever it is you want to do, there is probably a J School alum who's done it. So you might want to look those up.
Thanks, Anusha. That's great advice, and great advice from all of you. Probably one or two more questions. One is for Joseph, specifically about your decision. People are wondering, you said you had some great opportunities, experiences in the MS program with narrative writing, with Kevin Coyne, Jonathan Weiner, published stories. What was your own kind of thought process about why, seeing that you had some skill and talent at doing that, you decided to go more into entrepreneurial work as opposed to maybe writing more just full-time as a long-form writer? What was your own personal kind of career path thought process about that? And then can you expand a bit about on this entrepreneurial lab at Columbia and how you got connected with that in the first place?
Sure. So like I said, when I joined Columbia, I kind of assumed that I would end up being like a writer for a newspaper or a magazine. And I remember I love the art of storytelling. As a novelist, I love like the dramatic flow of the story. And I remember I was taking a newspaper writing class, and basically they said, well, you have to give the ending in the first sentence. And I was like, oh my God, like I don't like this, and I don't want to do this sort of writing. And so I kind of quickly learned that writing for newspapers wasn't for me. And I also realized that I am more interested in stories and not necessarily like cutting edge journalism, like the thought of like monitoring Twitter all the time to see what was popping up. I absolutely think it's something that is obviously imperative, but it's not something that I particularly enjoyed. And I realized that I like sort of like more human interest things. And I also realized that I will probably always be a freelance journalist, but I found that I like to write about things that I like to write about. I don't want to be assigned to have to go to a town hall and listen to Mayor Eric Adams talk about policy changes. That just wasn't exciting for me. And so I'm a little bit more interested in the artistry, and I'm fascinated with people's stories. And so for me, literally everyone's story is fascinating to me. And so it's very intuitive for me to eventually fall into this path. And then expanding upon the Columbia Startup Lab. So yeah, it was founded in 2010 to help Columbia entrepreneurs who want to start businesses to start those businesses. I kind of said it a little bit before, but they introduce you to mentors. They introduce you to obviously other peers that are also starting businesses and can commiserate with how challenging it is. Introductions to venture capitalists. It's a really, really cool office space down in Soho. Anusha, I know I had an event there and you attended.
Yes.
and yeah, and just basically like the full breadth of the broader Columbia school and alumni are there to help you start your business. A lot of my writers will come down there. Tina Wang, who graduated from the J School, I think 2 years ago or a year ago, had just finished a book for me, and we met down there and had coffee 2 days ago. And so I say that by people that are in New York City that want to come check it out, if they're thinking about doing something like what I did, want to see what the Columbia Startup Lab is, send me a message on LinkedIn, send me an email, come down, visit, co-work for the day, check it out and see what it has to offer. But yeah, a really, really incredible program. Literally the single most important thing I did since starting becoming an entrepreneur was joining that. And I probably wouldn't be here without it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And then we have a couple minutes left. So one last question, maybe just a quick answer from both of our alumni or Anusha as well. What do you think you wish you had known when you came to Columbia? Is there something that you had wish you knew that you know now about how to take advantage of the resources, how to go through the curriculum, how to make connections, anything like that? Is there anything, if you would go back, what would you say to yourself to do differently if you came to Columbia now?
Well, what I wish I had known is, again, BA in finance, MBA in finance and strategy. Columbia was much more challenging and rewarding than any of those degrees. And by the way, I should mention, I did my MBA part-time and I did my journalism degree part-time. And in a very good way, Columbia challenged me like 10 times more than my MBA program. And it was demanding, and I probably, as a part-time student, probably was not aware of how demanding it would be. But it really, yeah, was a very demanding curriculum and really helped me grow exponentially. But that's probably the only thing that really surprised me that I probably wish I had known. I remember when we were taking our picture, all the part-time students, and they were taking a picture and said, "Smile, this is the last time you're not going to be busy for 2 years." And I was like, "Oh crap!" And that was accurate.
Neha?
Yeah, I would say that I did not network during the program. And that's partly because I wanted to go back to India to work where I already had networks. So I didn't feel the need to do that while I was in the US. But I think it is very smart to do that regardless of where you want to work, because even if you don't even if you're not looking for a job immediately afterwards, it's always good to have these contacts, because you might want to report for these publications back in your home country, or if you're a freelancer. So yeah, building those networks is important, and it's not easy. So it can be frustrating. You might have to write multiple emails, and two people will respond to you. But I think it's worth a shot, because you're right there. You are a student at Columbia, so you will have the ear of a lot of people. You are also going to be writing assignments that could be turned into articles. So I, turned my thesis into, I published it with The Atlantic after I graduated. So for things like that, it is important. And I definitely did not do as much of it, or I didn't sort of like think about it in that way, which I would, in hindsight, think I could have done better. Yeah.
I'll just add that, everyone now jokes that I'm very good at networking, and I'm very active on LinkedIn, and I stay connected with alums and students and everything. But when I was a student here, the people I was closest with were only people who were in my classes. So I was for instance, in the covering religion class, where we went to Kiev and Moscow the year that we graduated. And I am closest with that group. And then, my initial class, the reporting and writing class, I wish that even for the other classes, I had spent more time with my classmates, because the class is about 200 plus students. And if I made friends with only those who were in my classes, that's about 50 to 60 people from my class. But there were so many others whose stories I didn't get to hear and didn't connect with. So what I'm saying is, spend more time with your classmates. It's really busy, but it's also important to meet everyone in your class. that's, I think, is the only thing I would have done differently, because I explored the classes I wanted to. I learned a lot, and obviously I was so in love with the J school that I eventually came back here, which I didn't know at that time. But that's it.
Great. Well, that's a great way to end our conversation. Thank you, Anusha. Thank you, Neha. Thank you for your insight. And Joe, that was a great conversation. Unfortunately, we can't get to all the questions we have in the chat today, so welcome to chat again if people want to join our drop-in hours, which I've set in the chat there. So you're welcome to sign up for those, and we can talk more about some of the questions we didn't get to today. But thank you, Neha, for staying up so late in Seoul, and Joe and Anusha for waking up and getting here early for a morning session here in New York, and everyone else who attended wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us. Might be an afternoon, evening, or morning where you are too, and for all of your great questions. So as I mentioned earlier, our deadlines are coming up December 15th for the MS and the PhD program, and January 5th for the MA program. So again, join us for some more drop-in sessions to talk informally more about some of your questions about the application process or anything else you're wondering about as you finish your application for the next year. We're happy to chat anytime, wherever you are in the world. And again, thank you to our Career Development Associate Dean, Anusha, for this great conversation. As she put in the chat her LinkedIn account, so welcome to connect with her there. And we look forward to continuing the conversation soon. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great night, have a great morning, have a great afternoon. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye.